What is the biggest obstacle today facing the creation of new affordable housing and mixed income developments?
So maybe I'll get started with that, Murphy. Our firm has designed over 40,000 affordable housing units around the United States. And we see one of the biggest obstacles is the availability of land at locations that would be desirable to live in. In traditional low-income and affordable housing situations, there's often plenty of available land in places that others don't want to live. So having a choice about where you live means having a more desirable location. And so having affordable land prices that are available in markets and communities that people would want to live in is, I think, an important thing. The other thing is we begin to think about the missing middle aspect of affordable housing is finding sites that not only are well situated, but also that will allow enough of an economy of scale of building types so that both the design cost as well as the construction costs allow for affordable construction of these building types.
I think there's really a growing gap. The other obstacles, there's a growing gap between the ability of people to afford and find housing and the resources that they have to pay for those. And that really mirrors trends in the larger society. And I think that's really the biggest obstacle. And it also plays out geographically that there's a growing gap between the haves and have-nots of location, as Tom talked about. So real estate markets that are hot and generate interest in more housing can leverage that interest in supplying affordable housing. So we see things like inclusionary zoning that allows density bonuses for the provision of affordable housing that works well in places where the real estate market can support that. But in real estate markets where adding density doesn't really help, there's a gap in that affordability as well. So it's a bit of a supply and demand problem, but it's also a policy problem. When that gap is big, either in the market or the ability to afford housing, there's only so much that the market can do to address it. We can design houses that have more economy of scale, that are more affordable, but that's only going to go so far, and there really needs to be a policy response. I mentioned inclusionary zoning, which is local policy response to help make that happen. Again, it doesn't help in places where the market can't respond to that as a carrot. But there also needs to be, I think, more national leadership and more political will to address this growing problem. And I think that's a real obstacle to affordable housing, and one that CNU has been very effective in addressing through its long history with Hope 6 and HUD partnerships. And I'm hoping for a regulatory and political landscape where we can get back to that kind of thing and lasso some political will to address this challenge.
In the face of movements such as NIMBY, have you found a way to express to communities whose zoning regulations may be upholding conventional sprawl how a form-based code could be monumental in helping to create communities that people actually want to live in and can actually afford to live in?
Yeah. Well, there's a phrase that I think comes from the education community, but we like to use it in our practice as well. And it goes something, to paraphrase it, it goes something like, the best way to respond to bad ideas is with better ideas. And so we work hard to come up with better ideas to address legitimate concerns, whether it's NIMBYism or whatever the concern might be from the stakeholders. Form-based codes are clearly a better idea, and a better idea to more simply address and illustrate regulatory ways of dealing with zoning and bulk restrictions. So we have seen success in that. When you can show people the better idea, it's always an effective tool to get there. When you can show people the results of that better tool, it's even better. So here's the form-based code. Here's what that looks like compared to your 300-page zoning regulation as it exists now. And here's a photograph of what that produces at the end of the day, the real live community, the walkable place, the place that you want to go visit, the place that you want to live in, the place that you want to shop in and you want to work in. So being able to illustrate that is a really great tool to overcome some of the NIMBYism. But I think even at a more fundamental level than form-based codes, it's really being able to have the conversation and being able to have the real conversation with the NIMBY or whatever the stakeholder is, to get at a real discourse and a real discussion about what the concerns are and how design and placemaking can help address those concerns, and how the participants in that kind of process can see their own ideas come out of that. And again, I'll give CNU a lot of credit for forging that kind of charrette model that really encourages that participation, that goes out in the community, that has real dialogue, that has real discussion, that has compromise, that has designers changing their minds based on what they hear, and hopefully at the other side of the conversation, people changing their minds based on what they see the vision and the possibility can be. So form-based codes are a great tool. Charrettes are a great tool. Really having an honest dialogue is the best way to overcome NIMBYism or whatever we might think of as a bad idea with a better idea. And I just add having that dialogue and that trust over extended periods of time. I mean, placemaking, place transformation, it does not happen overnight. It takes a long time to happen. So having the discussions up front, but coming back and continuing those discussions as the efforts evolve is really important, and the only way to sort of maintain that trust. If you establishing it up front is an important part of the dialogue, but you need to continue that so that everybody's part of the picture through to the end.
So that brings me to my next question, which this is another really hot button issue today, which is displacement, gentrification, and equity. And I'm wondering, has production of affordable housing by designers such as Torti, Gallas, and partners been a successful tool in combating displacement and gentrification in your experience? If you could just talk on that a little bit, it would be great.
Sure. So I think the first thing that's interesting is this contrast between your last question about NIMBYism and then here gentrification on the other end. And these are both bookends of really the same concern from different points of view. A fear of change, a fear of the unknowing. And in our early work in Hope 6, the goal was really deconcentration of density and low-income families. And so I think through that process, we learned a lot about how that can damage, in some cases, the kind of fabric of neighborhood social engagement and participation. And so we've evolved as the world has evolved in our thinking about creating these more mixed income, walkable urban environments. And there is still a fear, of course, that while we as low or affordable housing residents are looking for high quality housing within our neighborhood, we don't want to be displaced, number one. And so I think we're doing a much better job of that. But number two, recognizing that that kind of income mix in a neighborhood can be socially and economically healthy for the entire community. And
so taking advantage of kind of underutilized property, and even in, you know, the hottest real estate markets, you still have surface parking lots, you still have places, vacant areas that can be built on. So in a literal sense, when you're building on a parking lot, you're not displacing residents there, but you are transforming the economics of the place. And so in doing that is a great way, again, not to reduce physical affordable housing availability, but making sure through that transformation that, again, the opportunity and the choice is still available to everyone.
Is there a magic recipe for financing these types of developments? What are the elements that come together to make this possible, you know, from a finance perspective?
And I would just caution that there's probably not a magic recipe nationwide, that the solution really needs to be highly tailored to the local conditions. And to carry the recipe analogy a little bit further, it might all have be seasoned with salt and pepper, but it needs to be a gumbo in New Orleans. It needs to be a whitefish stew in Milwaukee, and it needs to take advantage of the local resources and what's in season. So things like the inclusionary zoning might be available in one locality, but not available in another. There might be more infrastructure resources and dollars available in one place and another's, but it always needs to be really highly specific to the challenge. And again, there are some common themes and some common tools, but each one is different than the other, and that's what makes them special.
Mm-hmm. Tax increment financing is one more method that we sometimes see for primarily construction of infrastructure or reconstruction of infrastructure, where local municipalities can see that it makes sense for them to provide upfront bond financing for the construction of revitalization of a community, so that together they can see a future income stream that helps pay down that. And I just saw one recent example in one of our projects where in 10 years, all of that infrastructure had been repaid back, and we saw a really thriving mixed income community going forward. I think we ought to talk for a moment about affordable housing for larger families, because we think that while we have general receptivity amongst our clients, whether they're for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, or even housing authorities, there seems to be fairly wide reception around the notion of studios and one-bedroom apartments and two-bedroom type housing. But when we get to the larger families, there seems to be quite a bit of uncertainty about how the market can respond to those needs. And we are constantly looking for innovations in the way we can design housing types that are both affordable and that can be supported by rents that can engage the construction of and design of those types in a way that because not all houses are, not all families are going to fit into that 0 to 2 bedroom kind of configuration.
I do have one final quick question, and I think it's very interesting how Torti Gallas Partners has a social equity component built into their mission as a designer. I'm interested to know, when did that start? What was the nexus of creating that type of framework for your business?
So our firm is actually 65 years old, and Torti Gallas and Partners is really the third chapter of that ongoing firm. And really, when John and I began to think about the direction of this third chapter, coming out of a firm that had primarily been architects designing and building the suburbs of most municipalities, we realized that part of our calling was going to be turning toward things like affordable housing and mixed income communities as we began to urbanize our practice and focused on more urban neighborhood revitalization. And so along sort of coincident with that was the first Congress of New Urbanism that John Torti attended and came back very excited about how this could be interpreted into a firm that had already been 40 years old and now was looking to transform itself into a new direction. And so as we began to engage with that, and also heavy involvement with the Hope 6 program, which was a HUD neighborhood revitalization program that our firm has designed 34 funded Hope 6s around the country. So we began to learn those skills, that it wasn't only about design, but we also had to think about the history, the culture, the economic impacts of the neighborhoods that we're working in. And I'd like to think that because we are a 40-year-old firm and had lessons that we could learn and then apply to the future, as we are still doing today, we can take those lessons and say, how can we do this better? Yes, we designed a physical structure that worked well, but did we contribute to the value and the quality of life of people living in those communities to the extent that we could have? And we continue every day to ask those questions of ourselves in our practice.
And I think that decision that John and Tom made 25 or 27 or however many years ago has been a great one for the firm, but it's also made us a magnet for like-minded people who want to do good in the world and want to do good work. So I would say, my interest in social justice comes from, a social worker mother and a Jesuit education. And when I was doing the production kind of housing and not feeling the satisfaction in that, I looked around and saw this as a place that could do both of those things: feed the interest in design, feed the interest in placemaking, and feed a need and a desire and a goal of doing social justice. And again, that was all at the same time that kind of CNU was going in the same trajectory. So it's been something that attracted me here, and in the 20 plus years since then continues to attract lots of talented, committed people who want to do the same.
I think it's unique and inspiring. So thanks so much, guys, for joining me. Thanks, guys. That was really interesting. I really appreciate your time, and we send these out once a month. So thanks so much for participating in this and going into such great detail on all of the different aspects of what we're focusing on today. So.
We appreciate you reaching out to us, Jay. This is we love to talk about all of this because it's what we're passionate about, and it's how we spend our days and our lives, and you can't separate them. So it's wonderful to have the chance to share some of those thoughts. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it'll really inspire people and kind of give some people some insight into. There's more to it than a lot of people realize. And I think that sometimes it really helps to get that perspective and, think about somebody that's interested in the field, interested in placemaking, or somebody who may change their minds a little bit about kind of things that they're working on. So it's just cool and thanks you guys for all your support of CNU and it's really enlightening to me to hear you guys talk about this. So I learned a lot, and I really appreciate your thoughts and just getting to know a little bit about what goes into doing these projects. We see these things and we opine on these things, but there's a lot more to it than sometimes meets the eye.
Yep, got to make the sausage.
Yeah. Well, let us know when you're going to put it out. We'd love to promote it here within the firm and outside your clients and so forth. So
terrific. I will do. It should be close to the end of this month, and I'll give you guys I'll send you a line and when it's ready to get launched.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks a lot, Jay.
Have a great weekend. Thanks guys. See ya.
All right, bye. Bye.
Hello, this is Jay Shepley, Membership Engagement Manager with the Congress for the New Urbanism. Thanks for listening to today's installation of Real Places, brought to you by CNU, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping create vibrant and walkable cities, towns, and neighborhoods where people have diverse choices for how they live, work, shop, and get around. And you can visit us at cnu.org for more information on becoming a member. And today we have Tom M. Gallas and Murphy Antoine of Torti Gallas Partners. Hello, this is Jay Shepley, Membership Engagement Manager with the Congress for the New Urbanism. Thanks for listening to today's installation of Real Places, brought to you by CNU.